Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Yeah, no, I don't think one can do any real thinking without engaging another person. I find it impossible, right? I have to engage somebody else. I have to engage somebody else who are going to disagree with me, or who is going to agree with me in one way but show me another way. I just can't do it, right? And I don't think any good thinking can happen like that. I mean, you can even when I'm reading a book, really, you know, I'm engaged with other folks, right? I'm saying, I don't agree with this guy, you know, and then Absolutely. with I mean, what we have now is just amazing in terms of being able to, I'm reading a book and I can actually reach the author through Twitter.
Yeah.
and I engage in a thread with him. My God, what a miraculous place we live today. If we take the opportunity to actually sharpen our thinking, I have this paragraph here in page 47. I can you please elaborate on that, because I don't think I agree with you. And the person responds, and I'm able to do that deep dive. I'm actually engaged in real thinking at that point.
No, absolutely. And I think that as much as I agree with that, I also want to say there is a danger in treating all texts as if they had virtual hyperlinks in them. Right. So that what it is to engage in really meaningful reading of an important text means changing your way of thinking of the world, right? Absolutely. And that involves, as I mentioned in the first lecture, one of the fundamental third lecture. One of the fundamental ways that most modern philosophy differs from classical Greek philosophy is that the reason to think of Plato and Aristotle as thinking that, what it is to learn something is also to see how your previous way of living embodied a falsehood, right? And what that requires is, some sitting with a text, right? And allowing yourself to be puzzled and going back at it again, right? There's a reason why someone like Sam Bankman-Fried was like, everybody's wasting their time if they're reading books. There's a kind of thinking that requires you to really dwell, right? Really dwell on something.
No, I agree with you. So what my favorite, I don't know if I have a favorite, but the one I'm right now reading a lot is Deleuze. And Deleuze is all Gilles Deleuze, right? The French philosopher. Mm-hmm. He's about repetition, difference, and all that. And one of the ways that I have been able to use that concept is like there are a couple of books that I have picked this year that I am reading and rereading like 4 or 5 times probably by the end of this year, right? There's a little and also the simmering, the simmering of the thoughts,
Yes.
Give it time, because even making a decision, I just take time, right? Because something good will happen if I don't immediately act in 3 days from now, or something that looks completely obscure, especially like Deleuze, he writes in very obscure. If you read it 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times, you will start understanding something, and you yourself change. I think you definitely change.
That's right. That's right. And I think that I think so. One of the main lines of argument that I began with this idea of trying to separate people from the assumption that their words can ever simply be in their thoughts, right? That thinking is something that we do in many ways, but we do with various kinds of symbolic and imagistic representations, right? And that it's that once we simply identify our thoughts with a prior expression of those thoughts, if we don't use those prior expressions as an aid to what Socrates called recollection, reenacting the active thinking, then it becomes dead, right? So one of the important ways of reading not only difficult texts, but we had you guys read Borges for the course.
Oh, I enjoyed that. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. And Borges is an ironic writer, and for me the most important figures in the history of European philosophy are ironic. And what it means to be ironic is not to be sarcastic, and it's not simply to have the idea of like a good audience and a bad audience. It's to engage in the kind of representation where part of the work you're doing is seeing what's limited or false about that representation, right? And so and that is something that you have to do to actually think, to kind of break up the kind of opinion-laden, dead acceptance of your previous assertions, right? Yeah. But it's also something that it prevents text, and in my reading, Plato is very much like this, from becoming simply another vehicle for authoritative acquiescence, right? Yeah. And one of the things that it's very hard to kind of think like, I just do whatever Duluth says, because that's not the kind of writing involved. And if you're reading Plato, well, that's also the way you should be reading Plato, right? This is a problematic occasion for recognizing ways that you are failing to actually think something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, Plato's last work, what was it?
Well, traditionally it's considered to be the Laws.
Yeah. Where he basically sort of challenges a lot of his earlier notions, right? And he just opens up a lot of things, and he shows you, in fact, that he hasn't settled anything, or he was not in the business of settling. I mean, Plato, right? In the settling of anything, but in the process itself, right? And so that, if I want to use the Deleuzian, vocabulary, instead of being, it's becoming, right? It's all your state of becoming. There's no static, I am X, right? Which is extremely stifling, right? So you are, I am a computer scientist. And so I do computer science things. But I also dabble on things on the side. No, I am this person who does a lot of things, who tries to mingle all these things together. And I think that sort of that unboxing yourself, so to speak, should be thrilling to folks to like, you don't need to be the best guitarist in the world. Just pick up a guitar and learn some strings, learn some chords, and there you go, enrich yourself, and then just keep on learning there, as opposed to becoming an expert. Again, the notion of expert. I'm expert in this and expert in that. Again, experts are important and all that, but this notion of sort of boxing ourselves. And now let me ask you the last question, which is, I tried to ask it in that session, the last session, which is the following. How do I get someone, because I encounter these guys all the time, someone who says to me, we are nothing more, our brain is nothing more than a biological version of a neural net. And I'm like, no, we're not. But they're like, but it's, it's obvious for them that it is the case, because they look at ChatGPT and they look at its behavior and how it actually exhibits what seems to be intelligence, right? They ask it a question, they ask another question, they're having a conversation. I mean, it's impressive in the sense of what it can do. Say, can you sum up this, this 3 paragraphs into sentence, and it does it, and it feels like there was a breakthrough, and so that people are now really believing that our brains are a biological neural net. How can I not convince them that it's not necessarily, but actually open their mind so that they can start saying, maybe I should go and find out more about this, because he has a point, and I need to make that point like this, right?
Right. No, exactly.
They don't have to listen to me, right, or read.
So I mean, as I mentioned in the final lecture, that there's a lot of good work out there that's showing the kind of problems with this as a model for what embodied human intelligence looks like. There's a recent book by Landgrave and Smith, which Machines Will Not Rule the World, which goes through all the arguments. There's I recommended the philosophy of science work of Nancy Cartwright, Lorraine Dostin on rules, Erica Thompson on models. These are some of the people that you can look at. But what I have done in my conversations with people over the years, and often for me, it's been talking to scientists who are working scientists in some particular field, but accept as a kind of matter of dogma a kind of broad physicalist account of the brain causing our behaviors and our thoughts. What I do is I try to appeal to their own experience of doing something like making a model or coming up with an explanation, right? The most basic thing that I began with in the lectures was this idea that we all know that our words are not our thoughts, right? We all know that, right? We've been told, we may have been told otherwise, but every experience of the difference between a rote memorization of something and what it is to really understand it, everything we were talking about in terms of changing your mind, the ways that they have found particular kinds of texts revelatory and allow them to see things in a different way, right? So I would get back to what it is for them to have a question, and the recognition that none of these, as I said in the final lecture, we use various kinds of representational systems as a vehicle for our thinking, right? All of the different kinds of models, algorithmic, stochastic, different kinds of neural nets, they do not have a representational system, right? They are that system, right? That insofar as they have any kind of unity at all, right? And but so what no computational system can do is do the kind of thing that, for instance, Einstein did, that said, oh, wait, our whole way of framing the problem is wrong, right? The entire, and so asking a question about the question, asking a question about what is the relation between the model and the world, right? Asking very broad general questions, and that these broad general questions, identifications of things like what it is to be a scientist, right? So, one of the things that I think is most destabilizing and debilitating for people in our current moment, right, in addition to the idea of experts, is the idea of science being a thing. Like there's this thing, science, and science tells you that, it tells you something, as opposed to thinking about the sciences as different forms of human inquiry with different kinds of institutional structures, and that so the most fundamental presupposition of a science is a scientist, right? And that so when you talk to theorists about the actual work of theorizing, right, what it is for them to take up a way of modeling a problem, right? That's a way, and the way that it involves not merely representing a goal, but having a desire and having a sense of the context, the problem context that they're trying to address, right? That none of this is possible without language, without social language, right? This is and fundamentally without desire, without kind of being a being that can be at stake in your thinking, right? Being a being that can be at stake in your thinking, and they should recognize that that they don't really believe that setting up a framework of kind of reward and punishment, that they call reward and punishment for a computational system, is like pleasure and pain. Like they don't really believe that, right? And so trying to return them to their human experience of thinking and learning, because that's what we're getting away from. We're getting away from the way that the most fundamental aspect of consciousness, this is what I ended with in the lecture, consciousness is our way of knowing things, right? In the way that we know something that could potentially be shared with another, right? Yeah. right? And so that very fundamental experience of what it is, their experience of learning, right? Their experience of suffering when learning, their experience of joy when learning, right? The things that motivated them to do those things. And the difference between anything like that and anything they tell themselves about what they should do, right? So this experience of acrosia is really important. Like when you bump up against the fact that, yeah, I'm stuck, right? Like that kind of stuckness of stepping back from the frameworks that we have been using to think about the world, right, is something that none of these AI systems could ever do.
Yeah. So let me therefore try. So this was useful actually, as was everything else, obviously. In the following, let's say somebody comes and says, like I said, right, they say we're nothing more than a biological version of the neural net, right? Because I have experienced ChatGPT and so on and so forth. Therefore, maybe what I can say is this. I'm trying it out on you for the first time. I'd say, look, let me ask you, human, do you, when you're hungry, do you think the same way as when you're not hungry? How about when you're drunk? Do you think the same way? How about when you're high? How about when you are on the beach? Are there the same thoughts? Or are you, I mean, the phenomenology, the phenomena that you go through are not separate from your thinking or the ideas that come to you, right? Is that the way maybe I could at least pierce through that wall? I'm not sure that I can convince them completely.
Yeah, so I have this paper called "The Virtue of Error: Solved Games in Ethical Deliberation," where I talk about the ways that if you're an adult who has moderate combinatorial skills, you can't really play tic-tac-toe anymore because you know how you're supposed to because you're just filling it out like you're spelling something, right? And so we have all these examples of things where what we treat as if their reasoning is just going into our long-term memory, right? So so most of our mathematical work isn't calculative, really. It's just memory of what 7 times 5 equals.
Retrieving,
right? Yeah. And what you were talking about, like getting drunk, right? Or having a crisis situation, right? And a crisis situation that allows you to see that you weren't really thinking about something.
Yes.
Right? That sometimes you're using these vehicles, and you're really kind of doing the work of thinking, and sometimes you're just being a passive vehicle for someone else.
And you're like, what was I doing, or why didn't I think of? Yeah.
Exactly. So what I said, at the end of this piece is I say, usually when we think that we've done something ethically wrong, we don't think that we followed a malign ethical principle. We ask, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
And then we say, I wasn't really. Right? I wasn't at stake in the thinking. It wasn't me that was doing the thinking, right? It was the vehicle, right? And so I think everyone has this experience, right? Everyone has this experience, right? And so kind of reminding them of that their values are not one box, and their embodiment is not another box, and their sapience is not disconnected from their sentience, which includes their feeling, right? That they are cognitive beings that have enormously complex ways of relating to and thinking about the world individually and with one another. And they know this. They absolutely know this.
Yeah.
And so that kind of thing, just reminding them of all these experiences, I think is the best way of seeing, we don't even, the idea of trying to program that in a computer is, it's just,
So you're saying that those key moments of stepping back and realizing that, or seeing yourself, all right, hey, that guy of mine, was not really thinking, and that move, right, is something that is number one, relatable. Number two, actually makes the point, right, that it's not just a bunch of rules. At some point, you go higher and you're looking at the system not having done its job, and maybe you learn from it and say, well, this is what I'm going to do next time, or maybe here's my reminder for making sure that I need to, ensure that the microwave doesn't burn my my food and all that stuff.
Yeah. So as you know, the last lecture, the main theme was genuine intelligence is general intelligence, right? And so the idea of general intelligence, so one of the most common ways of like seeing a mistake, right, is seeing, oh wait, I was equivocating. I was just using the term information one way in this part of the argument and in another way in this part of the argument, right? I was just treating the what it is for me to use some content, right, with the neurological or biological or mechanical vehicle through which I received. Right? I was just treating them as if they were the same thing. I didn't have a question there. What is the relation between these, right? And so it's that idea of seeing, oh wait, I was sleeping for that part, right? I was asleep there, right? I wasn't conscious about what I was doing, right? That's something, that kind of stepping back, right? That kind of stepping back and seeing and saying, oh, I was in error. I was in error, right? In terms of my way of kind of allowing this kind of machine to do the work for me, right? That's something that is essential to, certainly for any kind of, somebody who does theoretical work in computer science, they, when they are thinking about, wait, this way of framing it was wrong, let's find this new way of framing, right? They're familiar with it in that way, but we do it all the time. It is absolutely essential to what it is to genuinely learn.
Yeah. So sort of like if we were to put it in a Cartesian way, I am able to step above, therefore I am not a bot. Something like that.
Sure. Yes.
Right. Because I think Descartes was definitely onto something in terms of being able to, I don't know, triangulate, go up, right, and see what's going on, and saying that is actually the key thing that makes me, a non-illusion.
Well, so I think, yeah. So I mean, taught Descartes for over decades, so I've very kind of developed views on what he's doing in there. But there is something, certainly, when we think, so we call the course "No, we don't live in a fucking simulation," right? And I do want to make fun of people like David Chalmers and Nick Bostrom because these arguments are silly. I don't want to make make fun of the people who are kind of captivated by it, right? Because for two reasons. One, there are all sorts of reasons. We spend most of our conversation talking about it where it feels like we live in a simulation.
Feels like it, yeah. So so they are earnestly, just trying to figure things out,
Yeah, but also there is something about trying to separate what it is with the active aspect of our thinking, right, from our biological embodiment that really has deep roots, right? So that it is the case, and Aristotle is, this is very kind of standard Aristotelianism. Aristotle makes a distinction between our active mind and our passive mind, right? We can't think without having a certain kind of embodiment, but the doing the thinking and the vehicle we use for our thinking, including our embodiment, aren't simply the same, right? So when we're trying to think about the possibility of alien intelligence or the possibility of computer intelligence, there is something there which is trying to get to something that's real about the kind of essential freedom in active thinking, right? And so there is some, when you talked about kind of Descartes being above, there is something there. He's drawing on resources, particularly for his most interesting arguments. Draws on Augustine, but there's a deep thread there which points towards something real about how we have to make a distinction between discursivity, the kind of the strings of representations we use to articulate a thought, and what it is for us to actively do that thinking, right? And I think that part of what people are reaching for is a way of trying to stand above the idea of a simply physical or neurobiologically determined passive experience of the world.
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I don't know if we want to call it consequentialist or maybe a William James move, is that I refuse to believe that I am equivalent to a machine, because the consequences of thinking that I am the machine or the machine is me are nasty, and therefore, on those grounds, if nothing more, I just refuse to believe it or accept it. Or even if it's true, I'm not gonna accept it, and period, and that's it. And I'm going to elevate us above whatever things that we create. You know, it satisfies no one except me when I say that.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So one of the arguments I made in the final lecture was about determinism and about the idea that a pure physicalist determinism is inconsistent with the idea of being persuaded by an argument for physicalist determinism. Right? There's the microphysics cannot tell you what an argument is, and it certainly can't make the distinction between a good argument and a bad argument. Right? And so there's no way you can have a good argument for the claim that there are no good arguments. Right? So when you think about this, it's not just, I think you're right, you refuse to accept it, but also the idea that you could not just passively receive it, in which case its content is sort of, arbitrary, but if you can't actually think it, right? Because thinking it would involve thinking that you had good reasons for thinking it.
Yeah.
And the account rules out the possibility of there being good reasons for you thinking so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the reason why I reject all that, meaning I agree with you, is the following, and I always go back to this because it shows me the limits of common sense in a way when we try to sort of deal with philosophical questions in a commonsensical way. Here's what I mean. Zeno's paradox, one of Zeno's paradoxes, the one of the halving, right? You cannot go from point A to point B because you have to go through the middle. And you can't go to the middle until you go to the middle of that, right? My brain just cannot get around the conclusion that I will never go from point A to point B. Okay?
Yeah.
So
Solvitur ambulando.
What is that?
So solvitur ambulando. I solve it by walking.
Exactly. Yes. Thus, right? Or the poker, whatever. Yeah. Here's it exists. I solve it. So I sort of take that because when somebody starts like these long-termists and all these folks, right? When they start talking about, Bayesian, or they take Bayesian, statistics and just mutilate the hell out of it, and they do it. They don't do it in a way that is really formulaically, because the Zeno's paradox is solved mathematically, right? If you use the right tools, it's solved, right? But if you use language and you start to talk to people about language, you start saying things like, if everything was deterministic, how can we have an argument? I'm like, ring the bulb here, Zeno's paradox, there's something going on here, language is messing things up, reject all that shit, right? There's an argument, you can have it, right? And the rest of it is a total mystery. It remains a total mystery to me that why can't my mind figure out Zeno's paradox by purely thinking in the way that I'm thinking with you, right? I'm having. So what am I missing here, right? I can't figure it out. I can figure it out mathematically. I can have the equation right now. I can prove it, right? But I can't. So thinking through language has its limitations, in my opinion, right? And it will lead you the wrong way. And I think these long-termists are just taking that and just exploiting the heck out of it. Right.
Yeah. So let me use another example because the misuse of Bayesian statistics is one of the things that we talked about. But so I think there's a way of reframing the kinds of things that you're saying in terms of the kind of argument that we were talking about just a moment ago. In terms of talking to friends, colleagues, people that you meet in the spaces that you frequent. Which is about kind of thinking about what it is to be a human being, inquiring about the world, and that as the most fundamental presupposition of any kind of argument you can make, right? And the ways that they break from this, right? So the example that I often use is, Newcomb's paradox?
Yeah.
So Newcomb's paradox is a paradox where it's set up in the following way. There is one box that is opaque, has $1,000 in it. There's another box. There's one box that's transparent. It has $1,000 in it. Another box that is opaque, and it either has $1 million or nothing, right? And the paradox is supposed to go this way. You are asked by the person who's setting this up, who claims to be a perfect predictor of the future, right? That if you choose both boxes A and B, there will be nothing in the opaque box. But if you just choose B, there will be $1 million in the opaque box. And so this is supposed to be a paradox because according to game theory, shouldn't it be the case that you just choose both boxes? Because then, if it's already in the box, blah, blah, blah. If someone came to me and did this, what would my genuine reaction be? To run, right? It would be to run away because I would think this person's fucking with me, right? Or this person's crazy. This person is either fucking with me or crazy because I would have to throw away so much of my ability to reasonably engage with the world to accept that some guy could predict what I was going, it's that, these paradoxes, like long-termism, treats a framework that requires us giving up any sort of context which we are intelligibly engaging with our world, and we have a sense of the kind of problem space we're dealing with, and then treats it as if we could come up with numerical probabilities or treat that as a real decision problem. You can't, right? You can't be asked a question here. I want you to give up everything you know about causality and what human beings could do. In that situation, what would you do? That doesn't make any sense, right? That's nonsense.
Yeah.
And
you
so
lost the game once you start playing it.
Yeah. And so this basic idea is that, look, there are things, very basic things about what it is to be a human being who engages reasonably in the world and can speak to others and can learn and can frame a problem and has familiarity with that problem. You can talk about embodied cognition. You can talk about ecological psychology. You can talk about phenomenological tradition. You can talk about lots and lots of different ways of trying to articulate this.
Yeah.
But the most basic thing is that the presupposition of all of this is that we think, right? Is that we can ask questions and that we know what it is to think well and think poorly, to be engaged or disengaged, at stake or not at stake. We know the experience of being mistaken, right?
Yeah.
And any argument that begins by throwing all that out is nonsense from the beginning.
And usually you get that request to throw away your faculties and so on by experts, right? They are going to ask you to trust. You're going to trust them to take care of you and to give you, universal basic income if you let them scan your iris and so forth. All right. So as always, I want to have fun. It just passed the hour passed by very, very fast. So tell me, what are you working on right now? Are you publishing anything new? What's in the horizon for you? And where can people find out more about you and your work and the work that you're doing with Emily?
Okay, well, so one way is looking at the course that you took. If I can simulation.
Yeah, I'm going to have links. Actually, just I'll definitely have all the links to. But tell us about what are your next steps. I'll work with you offline.
So we're planning on running another. It was well oversubscribed, and so we're going to run another version of the course. We'll probably do that in person at the law center. And so, going to the Center on Privacy and Technology website, looking at one of the most recent blog posts, which was about the course. There are links there to my academia page, right? I taught at Grinnell, Hofstra, University of Essex, Steve Strings College, but I'm now an independent researcher, and so you can find the link to my academia page. The next thing that I'm working on, I have two essays that I'm working on for philosophic volumes. One on Hannah Arendt and Aristotle, and the other one on Philippa Foot, Aristotle and Nietzsche. But the main project will be turning the material that we broached in this conversation and in this course into a book. And we're also going to be launching a Substack with the same title, right? And so the idea will be to take a lot of the issues that we dealt with very quickly and have expanded treatments of things like what's wrong with the current uses of Bayesian probability theory, what's wrong with current uses of the argument for substrate independence, like these kinds of things, so I'm working on the book, and I'm working on the first few posts for the Substack now.
Wonderful. David McNeill, thank you so much for making the time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. It was great. Thanks, Ahmed.
Look forward to meeting you in Center when you guys launch that session.
Great. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.